From Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, I'm David Weston. Welcome to Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. We want to start with a check on the markets. Joining us today is Kaylee Lyons. So, Kaylee, it looks to me just from the moment I got up this morning, it's a risk-off kind of day.
Yeah, it is. And I think the primary driver of that, David, really is the lack of any kind of tangible progress on the fiscal aid front. Certainly, the worsening virus headlines don't help either. There may also be a little bit of taking risk off the table as we head into the weekend. But nonetheless, the S&P 500 is down around 0.7% right now. Almost every single sector within the index is in the red. The one exception is communication services, but it is the more cyclically oriented sectors, those recovery plays that are in the most pain. Energy and financials at the bottom of the pile. You can see the KBW Bank Index is off 1.8% today. The small caps, again, a cyclical play, are getting hit as well. But I just mentioned the banks, David. That, of course, does broadly have to do with the risk-off tone, but also what's going on in yields. There is that bid for safety in the bond market taking shape, not just today, but really over the course of the week. The 10-year yield is down around 9 basis points over the past 5 days, now yielding below 0.88%. And, of course, David, it isn't just here in the U.S. where we have deadlock when it comes to politics, but also on the other side of the Atlantic, the U.K. and the EU not getting it together when it comes to Brexit, and that has taken gilt yields lower by 18 basis points in just the past 5 days, David.
Okay, thank you so much to Kaylee Lyons. Well, as Kaylee just said, the markets seem to be reacting to the lack of apparent progress on that fourth round of fiscal stimulus, and we're getting conflicting signals out of the various camps. For a state of the play right now, and where it is on Capitol Hill, we go to our Capitol Hill reporter. She is Laura Davison. Laura, where are we?
Well, we're still where we were really months ago. The two outstanding issues that are still being talked about in the Senate are this aid for state and local governments, as well as this legal liability shield for companies over COVID lawsuits. So Democrats are pushing for this state and local money. Republicans say they want this legal liability shield. This has been an issue that's been outstanding for months. There are talks that are ongoing, which is a positive sign, but we really need to be at that point where there's a breakthrough, where they're coming out with some sort of compromise plan so they can start getting this down on paper, because they need to pass this next week. Next Friday is essentially the deadline for this. The other complicating factor, too, is that the bill that's out there, really it's not even a bill, it's just an outline. The plan that's out there does not include stimulus checks. The White House has said that they want to have at least $600 payments to individuals. Also hearing from both, Bernie Sanders, a progressive Democrat, you're not a Democrat, a progressive, and also Josh Hawley, who's a conservative Republican in the Senate, saying they want $1,200 checks. So that really adds to the complicating picture. Both sides, Republicans and Democrats, have agreed of a package that's around $900 billion. The question is, can they fit in all these pieces that everybody wants?
Okay, thank you so much to Laura Davison, who reports on Capitol Hill for us. And while that's going on, we're having increased shutdowns across the country. Just as Laura was speaking, the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, announced that, in fact, he would stop indoor dining as of Monday. So that's for all of us in New York. We're not going to be able to dine indoors anymore as of Monday. Now, for a view from the White House on the prospects of further fiscal stimulus, we welcome now Brian Morgenstern. He is White House Deputy Press Secretary. Welcome back. Great to have you with us, Brian. Give us the view from the White House. You're the official spokesperson. What does the White House want in terms of a fourth round of stimulus?
Well, David, it's great to be back with you. Thank you for having me. And the president's priorities have been clear, I think, from the start of this process, that he wants to help people and families. That's small businesses through the PPP program. He's always been supportive of direct payments, the checks in the mail, as Secretary Mnuchin has stated. It's things like that. It's getting businesses the protections they need. That's important to Senator McConnell, and we know that to get anything through Congress, we need to get it through the Senate. He obviously is closely in tune with his caucus, so we hear him. That's an important measure, allowing businesses to be open. Also, money for opening schools is an important thing that seems to have bipartisan compromise. We want schools to be open, and unemployment insurance benefits, a little bit of a plus up. We don't want to disincentivize employment, but we do want to provide relief to those who need it. Really, these measures to help people, to help families, to help small businesses have been and remain things that the administration is advocating for. It's unfortunate that we saw Speaker Pelosi sort of come out and indicate what we at the White House have been saying for months, that it seems like the Democrats have been delaying a deal for political reasons. Now that Election Day has come and gone, they seem to be willing to negotiate. It's unfortunate, the sort of political cynicism that we saw, but we are hopeful in that we see the two sides coming a little bit closer together. So we remain hopeful, as we have been for the months preceding.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I want to clarify something I said earlier. Apparently, the shutdown of indoor dining was not for New York State. It's actually for New York City. So I don't want to get people outside of New York City too concerned about dining indoors as of Monday. So Brian, let's come back to the Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, because he came out today and said just give up on the state assistance. He has proposed in the past, as I understand it, taking state assistance and that limitation on liability off the table, just taking that out and agreeing on what they can agree on. Is the White House in favor of that?
Well, David, the White House, over the course of this process, I think, as you saw, had come out in favor of several standalones, such as extending PPP, such as unemployment insurance, such as stimulus checks. Our priority is getting relief to the people who need it. That's why even in the absence of a bill, the president took action on an eviction moratorium. He took action on student loan relief. He extended unemployment insurance using disaster relief funds. So he's really been looking for any and all authority to provide relief wherever we can get it. He's been very open-minded. He has been really a good faith negotiator throughout this process. The difference, I would say, between the president's position, really the Republicans' position, and the Democrats appears to be that the Republicans are focused on getting relief to people, families, small businesses who need it. The Democrats' focus seems to be passing money between government entities. And that just really doesn't make sense when we have the American people out there who need the relief. That's who we're really focused on.
Brian, isn't it a fair argument, or tell me that it isn't if you think it's not, from the states who say, look, part of that money is going to keep people employed at the state level. We are laying people off. We want to keep state employees on the payroll as well.
Well, that is a concern. We, of course, support our police, our firemen, our teachers, and others. But look, the stimulus checks were for all Americans in a certain income group. The unemployment insurance is for all Americans who may be negatively affected. Really, we want to help every American family who needs it. We don't want to necessarily sort of play favorites or just pass money between government entities and sort of launder it between the federal government and state governments. We want the money to go directly to the people. That has been really our focus.
Well, Brian, to that point specifically, as I recall, the first round, President Trump really was enthusiastic about getting paychecks, just dollars into people's pockets directly out there. Again, you're supporting that. I guess it's $600 is what the support is. But we have Josh Hawley, a Republican, joining with Bernie Sanders, I must say, somewhat strange bedfellows, saying, let's make it $1,200, make it separate, just put it in to the continuing resolution. Would the White House support that?
Well, look, I would say that the president has broadly been in favor of the checks, as you saw in the CARES Act and in subsequent rounds of talks. He has been in favor. But look, there's a co-equal branch of government, and with two houses in it, as you know, involved in these negotiations. So we try to give the negotiators the space they need to really make progress. But I think the position that the president is broadly in favor of providing these direct payments to the people really has remained consistent.
We heard from Secretary Mnuchin, I believe it was yesterday, saying he's still optimistic something can get done. Is President Trump still optimistic? Does he think something can get done, recognizing I think we essentially have 1 week left, don't we?
Yeah, and the president remains and always will be a cheerleader for our country, and he knows that while our economy is doing relatively well, there are parts of it that are still suffering from the pandemic, and that's why he continues to support relief for those who need it, and really has remained optimistic throughout. As I stated earlier, I think the Democrats have shown a level of cynicism that's unfortunate here, but the president still remains optimistic that our negotiators can get something done. We remain hopeful that we'll get something done, and we stand ready to work with the Senate and the House to push something across the finish line if indeed it is possible.
Brian, as you say, the president is a cheerleader. The president tends to be an optimist from what I can see. Take us through this weekend coming up, because it strikes me this is really sort of a fateful weekend for the White House, for the President of the United States, because the Electoral College will meet and vote on Monday unless it stops from doing that. What are the plans at the White House? Is there something of a push going on at the White House specifically involved in litigation and possibly getting to the Supreme Court?
Well, David, that's really more of a campaign question, and of course, the president is working to vindicate any and all legal rights and achieve any remedies that he can in court to ensure that it was a free and fair election with the legal votes counted and the illegal votes not counted. But I will say that there is a strong focus here at the White House on Operation Warp Speed and the vaccines getting out to the American public. We saw just this morning the FDA, HHS, the secretary was out stating that the FDA has indicated it will approve the first safe and effective COVID-19 vaccine. That is extremely promising news for America. It's really great news. It should give us optimism that we are in the process of defeating this virus. And what that means, David, is that we could see FDA authorization, in the coming hours or day or so. We're not, we can't control the FDA, but we're hopeful that they will work very quickly. And that means we could have shipments this weekend, and we could have shots in the arm as soon as Monday in some places. So this progress is really outstanding. And Operation Warp Speed, the president's initiative here, is really a huge focus because it is a very important issue for the American public in helping to get us through the pandemic.
Brian, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't put you on the spot. The New York Times has just come out with a report that, in fact, we will get FDA approval as of tonight. Do you have any information on that?
So I would say that we are not in a position to speak for the FDA as to when they would come out with an approval, but you saw the Public Advisory Committee meeting last evening report out a favorable recommendation, and so we are really hopeful that the FDA will be able to move as soon as possible. If it's this evening, I think the White House would come out and cheer that announcement because really the president's position is the sooner the better because this is about saving lives, and that's really what it's always been about. And so if that happens, David, Operation Warp Speed is prepared to ship right away and get it to the end users as directed by the governors to long-term care facilities, to nursing homes, to vaccinate healthcare workers on the front lines. And we want to see people getting vaccinated, hopefully some people by Monday. That would really be outstanding progress for the nation.
Well, we'd certainly all hope for that. Thanks so much, Brian. Always has been a pleasure speaking with you. That's Brian Morgenstern. He is White House Deputy Press Secretary. Coming up, the view from labor on the stimulus negotiations, what's needed and what can't be compromised. With Richard Trumka, he's president of the AFL-CIO. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. We turn now to Mark Crumpton for Bloomberg First Word News.
David, thank you. Americans may start getting vaccinated for the coronavirus as soon as Monday. That comes from Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar. He tells ABC News that the FDA is moving to authorize the use of the vaccine made by Pfizer and BioNTech. The battle over a new coronavirus pandemic relief bill continues on Capitol Hill. Speaking on the Senate floor today, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell urged Democrats to drop their stands for assistance for states and pass a relief bill now.
Small businesses need saving right now. Unemployed people need relief extended right now. Vaccine distribution networks need funding right now. None of that should be held hostage over intergovernmental bailouts for states that are currently raking in revenue faster than they can spend it.
Leader McConnell also called for passage today of a one-week stopgap funding bill and for quick passage of a defense policy bill. With the December 31st deadline looming, both sides are warning that a no-deal Brexit is looking more likely. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen say they will continue talking through the weekend. Prime Minister Johnson had pleaded with EU leaders to step in and salvage the negotiations, but officials admit that without new political direction, the teams will have little to talk about. Authorities in China have detained a Bloomberg News assistant on suspicion of endangering national security. Haz Fan is a Chinese citizen who was seen being escorted from her apartment building Monday by plainclothes security officials. Officials say the case is under investigation and Fan's rights have been fully insured. A spokesman for Bloomberg says the company has been speaking to authorities to find out more. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg.
Thanks so much, Mark. One of the major sticking points in getting a stimulus deal done is the Republicans' demand that there be a limitation on COVID liability for those reopening their businesses, something some are concerned might put workers at risk. Welcome now the man who represents over 12.5 million of those workers. He is Richard Trumka. He's president of the AFL-CIO. Richard, always good to have you with us. Give us the view from labor, if you would, please, about this issue about limiting liability.
Well, we oppose any provision that undermines our ability to hold workers, or employers rather, accountable for jeopardizing the health and safety of workers. This would be the worst time to disincentivize business and employers from doing everything they can to protect the health and safety of working people and consumers, by the way, including those in nursing homes and other congregate care facilities. This is the worst time to do it during an upsurge in the pandemic. We've tried for months to get a standard, and this administration has refused to provide a standard. But what they want to do is shield business so that if business does nothing, or they're absolutely negligent, that they would be shielded from liability from not only employees, but from consumers as well. We think it's the wrong time to do it. We think it's overbroad, and we think it's totally unnecessary. And they're using it as to try to blackmail us to get a bill that would really help the rest of workers.
Richard, as I understand the proposal, it's not an absolute shield. What it does is give a safe harbor that says if you're an employer and you comply with federal and state and local restrictions on opening up, then you cannot be sued. And particularly as you look toward a Biden administration coming in, doesn't that give you some solace?
David, there are no federal restrictions. They're guidelines. There's nothing they're required to do. And so this would protect them if they did nothing. That's nice words, but it's overly broad and, quite frankly, unenforceable. There's so many ramifications from it. And in the middle of a pandemic, they should be focusing on getting a health and safety standard that protects workers. If they did that, then I could see talking to them about protecting employers who have done everything necessary or who complied with that standard. But there is no standard right now. It's all voluntary compliance.
We're looking at a deadline, as you know, of December 31 on some of those special unemployment benefits coming off. Some of your members may well be affected by that. We've seen Mitch McConnell, the majority leader, propose, okay, listen, if we can't come to terms overall, let's just take state assistance and the liability limitation off the table entirely and just go forward with the rest of it. Could you live with that?
Well, listen, I heard what they said, that they try to make this look like government entities exchanging money. Help to state and local governments isn't government entities exchanging money. It's protecting jobs. We'll lose 1 million jobs. 1 million people will be unemployed. 1 million families won't have any employment or any income coming in if that aid isn't there. It is necessary to keep the government going, the local government with services going, but it is also necessary to prop up the economy in general. 1 million people losing their jobs is going to be a drag on the economy like we've never seen or haven't seen for a long time. And so the result is they should be able to do something. It is Mitch McConnell and Mitch McConnell alone who is saying no to help those local entities. And we're talking about firefighters and teachers and first responders and nurses and snowplow drivers and people of that sort. He's done nothing for 6 months, nothing. And now he comes and says, let's jettison and let's forget about 1 million people. That's a pill too big for us to swallow.
So, Richard,
those 1 million people mean something to us.
Of course, Richard. I never want to let you go without giving us your perspective right now on the labor market right now. Where are we on the unemployment situation from your perspective?
The unemployment situation is really bad. We have 26.1 million people right now who are either unemployed or otherwise out of work because of the virus, or have seen their hours drop and pay drop because of the pandemic. and job growth is slowing, so a stimulus is needed. And the people getting hurt, of course, the most are minorities. Black unemployment rate is still 10.3%, David. That's higher than it was any time during the Great Recession. And their health care, they're getting hit more with the pandemic because they're on the front lines and aren't being protected. So it's a double whammy. They're losing jobs, they're out of work, and those that are working are jeopardize their health. So we have right now the official rate is 6.7%, but that's for the wrong reason. Yep. It dropped because 400,000 people left the labor market and aren't counted anymore because they can't find a job.
There's an awful lot of work left to do for the Biden administration as it comes in. Thank you so much. It's always a treat to have you with us. That's AFL-CIO President Richard Trumka. And a programming note now, Wall Street Week airs tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Larry Summers, Syra Malik, Catherine Baker, and Neil Ferguson will all be among the guests. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. It has been a stunning week for IPOs, capped off with Airbnb's big debut yesterday. Kaylee Lyons is here. She has the story.
Yeah, Airbnb's debut was remarkable, David. The biggest opening pop for any billion-dollar-plus IPO on record. It's up about 113% from its IPO price. DoorDash, for its part, up around 70%. The appetite for these new listings has just really been remarkable, and a lot of people are pointing to retail investors for that. They're possibly the reason why we're seeing such a wide gap between where the IPO price is and where it actually opens, and why there was so much money left on the table. And of course, it's not just buying directly into the stocks themselves, but also to IPO, the Renaissance IPO ETF. DoorDash and Airbnb not in that ETF yet, but it has gotten $173 million. $1 billion, worth of inflows. No, $1 million. I was right the first time, worth of inflows so far in December, which is a record. IPOs broadly, David, just really hot right now. December has been a record month. We've seen a record month of December in terms of new listings, capping a record third quarter, of course, this year. And so far in 2020, we've seen more than $163 billion worth of IPO volume. Things are just really hot in this market right now. But that is causing a lot of people to say the word bubble, David, hearkening back to 1999, that internet boom. If we can hop into the terminal at GTV Go, I could show you a chart that shows the S&P 500 performance relative to new listing performance from 1995 to 1999 tracks very closely to what we're seeing play out in the market right now, David.
Thank you so much, Kaylee Lyons. That was terrific. Very informative. Up next, President-elect Biden is running into some resistance in his pick for the Pentagon. We talk with a former senior Pentagon official. He is retired Brigadier General Mark Kemet. It's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. For Bloomberg First Word News, we go now to Mark Crumpton.
David, thank you. Here in New York City, restaurants will not be able to offer indoor dining as of Monday. Governor Andrew Cuomo says COVID-19 statistics surpassed benchmarks. The governor said hospitalization rates across the state are increasing dramatically and called them the ultimate cause for concern. Outdoor dining and takeout can continue. The head of the United Nations says the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed what he calls long-term fragilities, inequalities, and injustices in the world. Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the crisis has had a huge social and economic impact and caused damage that, quote, no vaccine can undo. Secretary General Guterres spoke from New York during an online event linked with the Nobel Prize celebrations a day after the World Food Program was awarded the 2020 Peace Prize. President Trump and his party raised $207.5 million in less than a 3-week stretch after the U.S. election. Money flooded into Mr. Trump's coffers at a much higher rate after he began to seek contributions to fight his loss to President-elect Joe Biden. And not all the money came from big money donors. The Federal Election Commission says the bulk of the cash came through Wired, the GOP platform for gathering smaller donations online. Turkey is pushing back against the prospect of sanctions from both the U.S. and the European Union. President Recep Erdogan said today Turkey's disputes with its allies can be resolved through dialogue and cooperation. His comments came hours after the EU gave the green light for the expansion of sanctions over Turkey's exploration of gas reserves in disputed waters. The country also faces U.S. sanctions for buying a Russian air defense system. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg.
Thanks so much, Mark. President-elect Biden has named his national security team, and his pick for Secretary of Defense is retired General Lloyd Austin, a respected four-star general who commanded CENTCOM. The problem is that he wore the uniform less than 8 years ago, and that's the statutory minimum for being out of service before taking over defense. Welcome now retired Brigadier General Mark Kemet, who served as head of planning for CENTCOM before going on to be a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense and an Assistant Secretary of State. So, Mark, thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate it. First of all,
sure.
What do you know about General Austin? I don't hear anybody question his qualifications for the job.
Oh, I don't think so. I've known Lloyd for many, many years. I served with him and under him in 2006. He is immensely qualified from a combat commander's point of view. The outstanding question is, can he translate that into the policy and the politics inside of Washington, D.C.?
Well, there's that question about can he really handle the politics. There's also the question about civilian control of the military, isn't there? Is that the origin of this statute, actually, that exists? It says that Congress says you got to be out of the uniform for 8 years because they're worried about that connection between the military, the uniformed military on the one hand, and the civilian control.
Yeah, in fact, I read an article this morning that I thought laid that out quite well. Under General Mattis, Joe Dunford, who was the chairman, basically, the two of them combined to make the Pentagon one voice. And when you add John Kelly over at the White House Chief of Staff, it was pretty much a Marine voice that was setting the entire defense policy. On the other hand, what you want is a close collegial relationship between the civilian side and the military side, but not the strong links that we saw under Jim Mattis. And what I found interesting about this article is they said the solution to that is retired General Milley, who's the current chief.
Oh, that's interesting. I see. That's interesting. But it's interesting. The pressure seems to be coming back from Democrats as much as from Republicans on this issue.
Yeah, exactly. People I really respect, such as Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin, used to be a former CIA employee, made the point simply that we just don't want too cozy of a relationship between those in uniform and those wearing a suit and tie. There has to be again, collegiality, but not uniformity in the thinking that happens inside the Pentagon. That's why we have civil military control.
In the meantime, and more imminent in a sense, is the proposal for the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, I think is what that stands for. Basically, keep the money coming to the military, which is really pending right now. And there are some issues. The White House has indicated the president might veto it.
That's true. Now, sequestration, which is the process of continuing to fund the military, has been fairly destructive because it doesn't allow us to do any long-term planning. But there will be money flowing to the troops and to some level of operations, but not if the NDAA is not signed. And what does the president have concerns about? Well, he's trying to roll in a number of his particular issues into the National Defense Authorization Act because it's the most likely piece of legislation to be signed before he leaves. So he's thrown in the issue of Section 230 communications authorities for Facebook and Twitter. He's thrown in this thorny question about the names of some military posts. And he has a couple of other issues that he says if it's not resolved inside the NDAA, he will veto it.
Yeah, it's hard to see how the Section 230 issue has anything to do with the military at all. Obviously, the names of posts do. But my understanding, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong here, is by and large, the military is fine with renaming those bases. It's actually the political side of the White House that's concerned about it.
Yeah, I think as we saw down at Virginia Military Institute recently, they pulled the statue of Stonewall Jackson with no significant outbursts of anger from anyone. Troops are troops. They know how the system works. They were not ever ashamed to be assigned to Fort Hood, but they certainly recognized the past of John Bell Hood. He was somebody who fought against the Union. Troops have other things on their mind, more so than the name of the post at which they're working.
Let's talk about some other things that I think are in this bill, this NDAA. Didn't necessarily come from the White House, but originated elsewhere. I think there's a requirement from Congress to say you have to punish the Turks for those. It's S-400, those Soviet, Russian surface-to-air missiles that require some sanctions to be imposed. Is that a good idea?
Listen, I think the threat of sanctions is a good idea with Turkey. Whether we follow through with them is a different issue. But President Erdogan has acquired a weapons system that is as dangerous to his allies, in this case NATO, as it is to his enemies. There's a concern that the S-400 would allow the F-35 to be detected. There's no way to know if the Russians haven't built an electronic backdoor so they can see that information. So this is going to be one of the many, many issues that we have with Turkey that will be brought up in the first couple of weeks of the administration under President Biden.
I believe there are also maybe provisions in there about withdrawing troops from Germany, something that some people up on the Hill are not happy about that President Trump says he wants to do. Where do you stand on that? Is it a good idea for Congress to be telling the White House where they should withdraw troops from or not?
Well, it certainly is not unprecedented that the United States Congress would get involved. And the way they get involved is by holding up appropriations if that action is not done. But I think there's some logic behind reducing the number of troops inside of Germany and redeploying them to Poland. Poland is a much more active area. The Russians are far more interested in that area. And we've been reducing troops in Germany since the end of the Vietnam War. When I was over there as a young captain, we had 375,000 troops. We're down to about 35,000. Bringing 10,000 out isn't going to make a difference. 25,000 soldiers or 35,000 soldiers aren't going to stop a million Soviets if they come into Germany.
And my understanding is that 10,000 wouldn't necessarily come out of Europe, right? Isn't there talk about repositioning them elsewhere in Poland or in Latvia, places like that?
Yeah, the idea is to take them from Germany and continue the buildup that we have started inside of Poland. We've got division headquarters there now. We've got a significant capacity to work alongside the Polish military, which is a good military. But that's where the action is. The action is not in the beer halls of Germany anymore.
Okay, thank you so much. Really great to have you. That's retired Brigadier General Mark Kemet. I'm delighted to say we're going to have more with him coming up at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Bloomberg Radio. In the meantime, coming up here, we're going to talk with the former Prime Minister of Ireland and former European Union Ambassador to the United States. He's John Bruton, about where things stand as we enter the crucial weekend in Brexit negotiations. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen seem to be preparing people for the possibility that there will not be a deal before the UK exits the EU on January 1st. We welcome now the Honourable John Bruton, who served as Prime Minister of Ireland and as European Union Ambassador to the United States. He is now chairman of IFSC Ireland, a private sector organization developing business in Ireland. So, Mr. Prime Minister, thank you so much for being with us. You've been in these rooms. You've dealt with a lot of these people. Give us your sense of what's happening. They say they're going to have to conclude it by Sunday, although we've had deadlines before. Do you think there is a realistic prospect for a deal at this point?
Well, Britain has already left the European Union, and there's been a period of 11 months allowed for negotiations on a new trade agreement between the European Union and Britain. Unfortunately, agreement has not been reached on the content of a trade agreement. And in the event that agreement is not reached and an agreement ratified, and it has to be ratified by both the European and the British Parliaments before Christmas, there will be basically no trade agreement, and a lot of very heavy tariffs will have to be introduced. For example, on car parts being exported from Britain, food being imported into Britain or exported from Britain to Ireland or other parts of the European Union. And indeed, a lot of other agreements that exist, which were built up by the European Union during the British membership over 45 years or more, these will also fall by the wayside because Britain objects to the idea of there being European rules, the content of which is adjudicated by the European Court of Justice. They don't want anything to do with the European Court of Justice. They don't want anything to do with European rules. They want to make their own rules alone. And that, of course, means that British standards could rapidly become completely incompatible with European standards. They could have lower environmental standards. They could have lower labor protection standards. They could have higher standards in other areas, or they could be subsidizing their goods, or alternatively, European firms, EU firms could be subsidizing their goods or undercutting Britain. And what the European Union wants is a code of practice that everybody understands, that deals not just with existing regulations, but with future regulations, so that there is fair competition in free trade between the two. But we can't really have free trade without fair competition, and that's the difficult area that has yet to be resolved.
Which is very well laid out. And as I understand it, this appears to be the largest issue there. And it's understandable this is sort of sovereignty both ways. Both want to be able to set their own standards. But this is the part, Mr. Prime Minister, I don't understand. The proposal, as I understand it, is that, okay, we'll start out with the same standards. If they diverge, there's a remedy, which is, okay, we'll have to adjust the terms of trade. Aren't they better off starting out saying, okay, we're pretty close to each other right now. We'll keep going as long and as far as we can in the areas where we do stay in harmony, rather than blow it all up and go to WTO terms for everything?
Well, the difficulty with making an arrangement on those lines is that you'd never know what the future held. There'll be no certainty. The whole idea of an economic partnership or a trade agreement is that it lasts indefinitely, and businesses which have to make substantial investments to develop goods to sell to a market maybe a year, 2, 3, 4 years from now, know that the rules will remain more or less the same 3 or 4 years from now to what they are today, or they will be changed in a harmonious way. If Britain decides it's going to leave and it's going to have different rules, and that on principle, having different rules is something that they insist upon, that means that businesses from the European Union wanting to develop the market in Britain, or indeed British firms wanting to develop the market in the European Union, won't know where they will stand and therefore will have difficulty investing. We want the maximum amount of certainty as well as the maximum amount of fairness. It is important to say, however, that this works both ways. If we have a code of practice that prevents unfair competition, that would prevent unfair competition by EU firms to the disadvantage of Britain, just as it would protect EU firms from British competition that was unfair. It's a two-way process to have common standards. It benefits everybody.
So, Mr. Prime Minister, as you lay that out, it sounds like it's going to be pretty difficult to come up with a deal. It's understandable why both sides are sort of signaling we may not get a deal here. Let's talk about the practicalities of that, and let's come back to your home country in Ireland. What happens? Is there going to be a border with Northern Ireland? Are they going to have customs clearances coming across that border?
No, we've reached an agreement. The EU has reached an agreement with Britain that the border, if there is a border, and if there's a trade agreement, it will be a much less important border than if there isn't a trade agreement, will be on the Irish Sea between Northern Ireland and the mainland of Britain, rather than on the unenforceable 300-mile-long land border in Ireland. That's already agreed. So if there are tariffs to be collected or the conformity of goods with standards to be checked, it will be done at a port in London, in England or in Belfast, rather than on the border in Ireland, which would be impractical, as well as being politically very explosive, because it would aggravate the tensions that have existed and have cost so much lives in Northern Ireland over many years.
Exactly, something none of us can conceivably want. I dare say that probably Ireland is one of the economies most closely integrated with the United Kingdom at this point. What are the possible economic effects on Ireland, on investment in Ireland, on business in Ireland, on employment in Ireland, if in fact there is no deal and we go back to WTO terms for trade?
Well, there will be pluses and minuses, but more minuses than pluses. On the minus side, we will face substantial tariffs on our exports of food products to Britain. And indeed, 70% of the food that they eat in Britain comes from the European Union, and they will be paying higher prices because of higher tariffs for the food that they buy in British shops. But the same operates in reverse. Britain will face tariffs on its lamb exports, for example, to the continent of Europe, which it doesn't face at the moment. And indeed, Ireland may take some of that market because Britain can no longer supply it. And get over the tariff wall. There also has been a significant movement, indeed, of financial services from London to Ireland, to Paris and to Frankfurt, because the EU market is much bigger than the UK market, and financial service operators want to be in the big market where they can serve a bigger range of customers. So being in the EU, being in Dublin or Frankfurt or Paris, is more advantageous than being in London for many in the financial services field. So that's a plus, if you like, for Ireland. But we would far prefer if there was agreement. Indeed, we would far prefer if Britain had never decided to leave the European Union at all. Because as long as we had a common set of rules with Britain, we were able to meet them on all sorts of occasions where we were doing work together in the European Union, and that reduced tensions and promoted understanding between Ireland and Britain. And those opportunities are now going to fall away as a result of Britain's insistence that it must be sovereign at all costs.
Mr. Prime Minister, I can't let you go without asking you about the situation with COVID in Ireland. How is Ireland faring?
Ireland is doing relatively better than most European countries, but we still have a significant problem. In the last few days, there had been reductions in the incidence of COVID, but that seems to have flattened, so to speak. And we are worried about Christmas, that there will be a lot of mixing of people over the Christmas, and that a lot of people may be coming back to Ireland from other countries which have a higher level of COVID perhaps than we have, and that could lead to a spike in COVID cases in January and pressure on our hospitals. And we're hoping that won't happen, because it will cost lives if it does.
Right. Well, that's one thing that we are on the same page as you are on. Thank you so much. Really a treat to have you with us. That's the Honorable John Bruton. He's former Prime Minister of Ireland. A programming note, Wall Street Week airs tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Larry Summers, Syra Malik, Catherine Baker, and Neil Ferguson are among the guests. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I am David Weston. In just moments from right now, SpaceX is scheduled to launch its Falcon 9 rocket from Cape Canaveral. The rocket this time will be carrying a satellite for Sirius XM. For all of those who get Sirius XM on your radio, this is the way you get it. Joining us now is Sean Casey, Silicon Valley Space Center co-founder and managing director. So, Sean, thank you so much for being with us. For the television part of our audience, we are now watching this rocket on the launch pad. Give us a sense of the significance of this particular launch.
Right. Well, this is a very exciting launch because this is actually the seventh launch of the B-1051 booster. This booster, the first stage, was previously used for the NASA Crew demo mission back in March of 2019. It launched the RadarSat in June of 2019, and then the last four launches, the last four uses of this booster have been for support of the Starlink mission. Starlink is typically launching about 15,000 kilograms to low Earth orbit to build out the Starlink constellation. Another booster, B-1049, has also done about 7 launches, but this is the first booster relaunch that has, that's had 6 previous launches, and that's actually launching a commercial payload. As you mentioned, this is the Sirius XM radio satellite, which was built by Space Systems Loral. It's replacing one of the Hughes Boeing satellites that's already in a geostationary orbit. So this represents a tremendous milestone for SpaceX in being able to build and refly these boosters. The Block 5 is a workhorse for SpaceX. The goal is to get get reuse of these booster programs to bring the launch cost down by a factor of 10x. And this is just yet another big milestone for SpaceX. This is the 25th flight for this year. 80% of the flights for 2020 have been with reused boosters. This beats the 2018 launch record of 18 flights per year. And today's flight, this is actually the second heaviest non-classified payload that SpaceX has launched. So as we're sitting here watching the countdown, What matters is just the first couple of minutes of the launch. It looks like things may be on hold right now.
Well, exactly. It was supposed to launch at 55 after the hour, and it's about 56 right now. So we'll continue to watch this. My colleague Volley Quinn will step in with Sean Casey. In the meantime, that does it for me on television. I'm going to go over to radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg.